We're going to dive in with our main story this week concerning something Donald Trump absolutely hates, and even more than finding makeup that'll match his complexion. Go to Sephora, dude. It'll take 10 minutes. Specifically, we're going to talk about the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. It was once described as the world's single largest humanitarian donor, providing aid in the form of disaster relief, global health, food assistance, climate resilience, education, and much more. And when Trump returned to the White House last year, he made it clear that the agency was in his sights.
USAID, run by radical lunatics.
It sounds so nice, USAID, isn't it beautiful? But it's a whole big scam.
When you look at USAID, that's a fraud. The whole thing is a fraud. Very little being put to good use.
OK, so set aside the irony of Donald Trump, of Trump University, accusing anything of being a fraud. You can't just call something a scam because you don't like it. I want to call low-rise jeans a scam. I feel like Peppa Pig's a fraud. I believe radical lunatics run Jamba Juice. Liquid fruit isn't a treat, it's cough syrup at best. But even I acknowledge that my feelings don't make any of those thoughts true. But Trump was fixated on USAID and its spending, which is a little surprising given it amounted to less than 1% of the federal budget. Yet, Trump and Elon Musk quickly dismantled the agency, with Elon at one point proudly tweeting he'd spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. And a lot of MAGA Republicans were ecstatic about that. Right-wing influencer Benny Johnson even made a trip to D.C. to celebrate.
I just got into Washington, D.C. I had to see it for myself to believe it. USAID is no more. Check it out. There we go. Got the duct tape. Got the doors all closed off. Got everything all blacked out up there. Had to see it to believe it. The consequences of Doge. They're not effing around. I encourage you to come here. Probably the #1 selfie spot in all of Washington.
First, congratulations to Benny Johnson on winning 2026's Most Punchable glasses, and I say that as the former holder of that title. But also, that's clearly not the #1 selfie spot in D.C. That'd, of course, be the Washington Monument, taken at an angle so it looks like a dick. Or a cherry blossom tree, so that it looks like a dick. Or one of those pandas at the National Zoo, so that it looks like a dick. But it's not just Benny Johnson. The House Foreign Affairs Committee Republicans celebrated the collapse of USAID by posting this incredibly shitty meme. Now, that is obviously gross, but it does say something about how annoying J.D. Vance is, that even in that context, one of my first thoughts was, wow, J.D. made the cut. Good for him. And if you think that meme is in bad taste now, just wait until you see the consequences of these cuts, because they've had real impacts on people around the world engaged in the act of saving lives, like this nurse who, among other things, vaccinates children in remote areas of Uganda.
To reach the isolated eastern Uganda mountain communities that need her help, Nurse Agnes Namboza scales a treacherous 1,000-foot ladder. It's too steep for small children, mothers carrying babies, and the sick to climb down. Now Namboza's path has gotten tougher. USAID cuts have eliminated many jobs at her clinic, as she and those who remain try to take up the slack. Avoiding burnout could be as much of a challenge as getting to the isolated communities that need her help.
Holy shit! That image of her on the ladder is absolutely incredible. It's like Free Solo, except unlike Alex Honnold, she's not going out of her way to make such a big fucking deal about it. But the point is, they took what appears to be the hardest job on Earth and somehow made it even harder. And that is just the beginning of the consequences here, because these cuts are estimated to have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths last year alone. So given all that, tonight, we thought we'd take a look at USAID, specifically what we've lost, why it happened, and who is responsible. And let's start with the fact that USAID was created in 1961 by JFK for both humanitarian reasons and also to increase US soft power abroad. And since then, it's come to take a leading role in everything from fighting disease to disaster assistance. In fact, when there were devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria just 3 years ago, the agency sent a response team that at one point comprised more than 200 people, many of whom assisted with search and rescue efforts like this.
With signs of a survivor, the USAID team calls in reinforcements, and then we witness the impossible. Turkish rescue workers managed to recover a living victim.
This is extraordinary. You can see what looks like a middle-aged man being pulled out of this wreckage.
OK, that is obviously incredible, but was it completely necessary to describe him as what looks like a middle-aged man? Was that pertinent? I'm just like, I hope he's right about that guy's age, because if it turns out he's actually 19, the last thing he needs is some reporter calling him old. Hey, my hair is white from the dust of the building I've been stuck under for days, you arsehole! It's frankly no wonder that thanks to scenes like that, USAID has enjoyed broad bipartisan support. In fact, when the agency turned 60, Lindsey Graham sent this video message.
Happy anniversary to all my friends at USAID. You've made a big difference in the world. You're a force for good. Created a great impression for our country, and you changed lives. I've been a big champion for a long time. Enjoy this anniversary, and when it comes to USAID, the best is yet to come.
Well, that's nice, isn't it? And I'm sure it motivated employees back then beyond belief. Imagine suddenly getting a message from the man who succeeded Strom Thurmond, speaking with all the enthusiasm of someone who just got paid $6.50 on Cameo. But it wasn't just Lindsey Graham. Marco Rubio was also a huge supporter, praising the agency's work on at least 24 occasions over more than a decade. In fact, when he was named Secretary of State, many USAID employees were hopeful, thinking he'd help to protect them. But that is not what has happened, because this administration quickly brought USAID to its knees. By February 1st of last year, its website had been taken down. By February 7th, almost all its 10,000 employees were placed on leave. And by mid-March, after a supposed 6-week review, 83% of USAID programs had been terminated. And in a sign of just how thoroughly the agency had been destroyed, when there was a massive earthquake in Myanmar last March, instead of getting hundreds of US rescuers, this is what happened.
Aid workers say help from the United States, at least, is nowhere to be found. No American rescue teams, no visible U.S. presence in Mandalay, no American flags on the food trucks.
The United States only sent a paltry amount of assistance. It sent only 3 workers, which then subsequently were fired.
It's true. We sent 3 workers and then fired them while they were there. And not only is that not enough people to send to an earthquake, for what it's worth, it is exactly the wrong number of people to send on any trip, even under the best circumstances. 2 people, sure, that's intimate, but you can both spend time alone if it's feeling tense. 4, more combinations, more vibe possibilities. Don't want to window shop in the commercial district with Casey? No problem. You can hang by the hotel pool with Leanne. But 3? That is a nightmare. You're either shit-talking Tamara for being annoying about the street food tour, or you're alone knowing that the other 2 are shit-talking you for being so annoying about the riverboat thing. And at this point, it is worth engaging with the arguments for dismantling USAID. And let's start with the claim that there was, to use Conservatives' favourite phrase, waste, fraud and abuse. Elon claimed that the vast majority of the agency's spending was either wasteful or nefarious. And here is his response when Joe Rogan pressed him on that.
So is there a way to audit all this stuff and find out, oh, these people are actually just sending food to poor people. These people are actually just helping people with water in third world countries. There's a way to do that and keep funding those?
Yeah, I mean, we have continued to fund things that appear to be legitimate, even with the flimsiest, if there's even the flimsiest excuse. Like, I just say, like, send me a picture of the thing. Like, you could literally have AI generate the picture. But if you're not even willing to try to trick me, then we're, like, not going to send the money.
What the fuck are you talking about? Send me a picture? You can't treat foreign aid like it's a Grubhub delivery. And by the way, I don't even think Grubhub drivers should have to do that either. Enough is asked of them already without making them take an awkward photo of me accepting my bag of ramen. And to address Rogan's question, there actually was an army of staffers, including auditors and lawyers, both inside the agency and in its Inspector General's office, whose job it was to track spending. And for what it's worth, one review found in the last 6 IG reports of USAID, 94% of the spending had been audited and only 0.3% were found to have issues. And even then, half of that was reclaimed. But even without knowing that, it's tough to take waste allegations from Elon seriously, given his Doge team seemed to have no idea what the programs they were cutting even did. ProPublica recently revealed that people at the agency watched as their brand new chief of staff scrolled down a spreadsheet of programs, turning rows red, yellow or green every few seconds, never asking a single question. Then, realising that the red programs were slated to be cut, they frantically started editing descriptions so he'd at least know what those programs did. And while the administration at one point insisted that programs would be spared if they were considered life-saving, just listen to this former USAID employee tell a Senate roundtable how those decisions got made.
When we kept flagged a long list of awards that were needed for life-saving activities, we were told that the problem was the names of those awards didn't make clear that they were life-saving. It didn't have the word life-saving in the name, and therefore it was very hard for the Secretary's team to understand which awards should or should not be terminated. And so the implication was that if we had been more clear in the names that these were life-saving awards, maybe then they would have been saved.
Now, obviously, that is stupid for 1,000 reasons. First, because everybody knows that names aren't usually literal descriptions of what you are getting. It's the reason that ketchup isn't called salty tomato-inspired glop. Conjunctivitis isn't called shit on your finger then touched your eye disease. And this show isn't called Facts You Read in the New Yorker 18 months ago with what seems to be a middle-aged man. It's called poetic license. And it is notable that for all the talk of fraud, even Jeremy Lewin, a Doge guy who eventually served as deputy administrator and COO of the agency and who often personally decided which programs should be axed, later admitted his team didn't find much.
You know, people talk about fraud, right? Doge didn't find that much fraud at USAID. It's sort of a definitional question. What is fraud? In the sense of, well, you know, maybe I defrauded you. The grant says I do X and I do Y, right? That's a very narrow conception of fraud. But is it a fraud to say you have this organization that, you know, the New York Times has painted as feeding all sorts of, you know, poor and destitute people around the world, but in fact a significant portion of the money is going to pay $400,000 salaries at UC Berkeley to do climate and sort of race science research, right? Is that a fraud on the American people? I mean, I would say it kind of is.
OK, so radicalised young Sheldon there is basically answering, did Doge find fraud, with, it's a definitional question, which isn't a great look. If you ask a detective, did you find the killer, and he says, it depends how you define the words killer and find, it would be safe to say the Tulsa Strangler is still definitely at large. As for his claim there about salaries for race science research projects, we tried to find out what the fuck he was talking about, and we couldn't. We even asked him and the State Department for more information about it, and they didn't provide any. But if the very phrase race science set off alarm bells, you should know people who knew Lewin in high school said he had a history of violent outbursts and racist remarks, and that he believed non-white people were inherently of lower value than white people, which seems like a whole lot of words for racist, and I don't think that's a definitional issue. Now, before Lewin got that job at USAID, his position was held by a different member of the Trump administration called Pete Morocco. He actually worked there during Trump's first term too and attempted to delay or halt dozens of programs, but ultimately wasn't successful, which is why, when he came back last year, one former official said, what we're seeing right now is Pete's Revenge Tour. And for the record, Pete's Revenge Tour sounds like a band composed entirely of former middle school football coaches who got fired because kids kept getting heat stroke, and all of whom were at the Capitol on January 6th. And I only say that because Morocco did apparently storm the Capitol on January 6th. With his wife, by the way. Couple goals. But the thing is, as eager as this administration has been to eradicate any funding it claimed was going to woke causes and singling out small individual expenditures for ridicule, it still doesn't explain wholly dismantling this agency. Because traditionally, administrations have been free to make sure foreign aid reflects their values, whatever those values are. Just listen to the man who ran USAID under George W. Bush explain that to Congress.
When the Democrats took over, they moved the agency to the left. I moved it to the right. The Obama people actually said I was very right-wing. I was the most right-wing administrator in the history of the agency, and yet the career people followed what I wanted to do in the agency. We put heavy emphasis on economic growth. I believe in economic growth. I believe in the private sector. I believe in free markets. That's what AID does. The notion that AID is some kind of a Marxist institution is absolutely ridiculous, okay?
Exactly. Think of USAID like the cha-cha slide. You can slide it to the left, you can slide it to the right, and the next administration can then take it back now, you're. Even during Trump's first term, he didn't take USAID apart. He just shifted its focus by deprioritizing areas like maternal health and family planning while increasing funding for emergency responses and digital infrastructure, all of which raises the question, what changed this time to make them want to put the agency through a wood chipper? Well, I'm afraid the answer to that is incredibly dumb, because many observers think it has something to do with this guy, Mike Benz, a far-right conservative activist. Elon's fixation on USAID appears to date to late 2024, when Benz appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast and shit all over the agency. Elon then retweeted, replied to, or mentioned Benz over 160 times in the next year, sharing things like USAID was a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America, and USAID is a criminal organisation. Even that wood chipper tweet was in reply to Mike Benz. And it's worth taking a minute to explain who Mike Benz is. He worked a few jobs during Trump's first term, including a brief stint at the State Department, and he is, to put it mildly, a chronically online lunatic. Among the things he's posted are this portrait of Trump made out of charcuterie and this AI slop video where he farts in former FBI Director Chris Wray's mouth. He also once posted about the jeans he got for his birthday, and you're thinking, well, hold on, that doesn't seem so bad to me. I'll point out, these were the jeans. That's right, he got 9/11 jeans for his birthday. You can apparently buy those jeans online for $180, and the reason I know that is, oh, fuck you, how little do you think of me? But it gets worse, because Benz apparently used to be a content creator who went by Frame Game and pushed a variety of far-right narratives, including the Great Replacement theory, and made montages urging white viewers to unite under the banner of race. And he is fixated on the notion that USAID is basically a front. Here is how he put it to Rogan in that interview that got Elon's attention.
There's no aid in USAID, by the way. That your brain is being tricked when you see the phrase USAID. It's not an aid organization. The aid in USAID stands for U.S. Agency for International Development.
Yeah, it's an acronym, Mike. It's an acronym. We all know how those work. You haven't exactly blown Roswell open there. But that's just the beginning. Benz has also said, when it's too dirty for the CIA, you give it to USAID, which for the record is obviously not the case. We all know when a job is too dirty for the CIA, you arm Afghan mujahideen and train them in cell warfare with a stated goal of beating back Soviet influence in the region, and then coincidentally, they team up with Osama bin Laden, who will later carry out the very attack Mike Benz is so obsessed with, he got birthday denim merch. And look, that is not to say there aren't small grains of truth underneath all of Benz's bullshit. You know, USAID was not perfect, as one of its former heads of global health wrote. It sometimes fostered dependency, it could be inefficient, too much of its funding went to international institutions rather than local ones, and yes, its history does include episodes in which aid was bent to American military and political aims, including an incident in 2010 when it created a social networking service in Cuba designed to kindle opposition to the government. And I do not like the fact that the agency did that. In general, I like my regime changes the way I like my produce, locally sourced. But let's not pretend instances like that were anything other than a tiny portion of what USAID did. Also, as the people of Venezuela and Iran can attest, when the US wants regime change nowadays, it tends to do so pretty fucking directly. So it's not like any of those criticisms justify getting rid of the agency entirely. But to hear Benz tell it, USAID is basically the root of all this world's problems.
USAID is one of the most disturbing organizations in the entire federal government. It may rank number one, in fact. Many people think they live in the world they think they live in, but in some respects, it's a carefully constructed Truman Show made up of movie characters around them produced by USAID. And what I mean by that is USAID has infected the institutional architecture of every aspect of American society and world society.
Wow. The whole world has been Truman Showed by USAID. is not something you expect to hear someone say on TV. At best, it's something you expect to hear them muttering on a city bus. Yeah, they've infected the institutional architecture. You know what? I think I'm going to get off here. I know we're halfway across a bridge, but I'm pretty sure that this is my stop. It's frankly no wonder Benz took a victory lap when USAID was gutted, posting this image of himself celebrating at its grave. And at this point, you should probably see some of the damage that's been done, because it is vast. As one expert put it, I think the best evidence that USAID works is how quickly people started dying when it went away. Now, it is hard to get exact counts on deaths, partly because these cuts have, among other things, halted data monitoring. But researchers have estimated over 262,000 adults and over 500,000 children died last year as a result of these cuts. Though I do have to tell you, Marco Rubio strongly denies claims like those.
Anybody who tells you that somehow it's the United States, if we cut $1, somehow we're responsible for some horrific thing that's going on in the world is just not true.
Are you standing by your contention that no one has died
because the United States has cut aid? No.
OK, so is he telling the truth there? Well, I would argue that the answer to that is the same as the answer to the question, are Marco Rubio's ears proportional to the size of his head? Which is to say, absolutely, demonstrably not. And maybe the best way to rebut that is to show you some of the specific places and programmes that have been impacted by these cuts. And let's start with food and nutrition assistance, which have been devastating. For instance, in Nigeria, clinics which provided malnutrition treatment for more than 300,000 children below the age of 2 were shut down at the end of July. And in Afghanistan, NGO warehouses were bare, despite 900,000 children being in desperate need of treatment for severe acute malnutrition. And it is not just cuts to the food itself. The administration also disrupted the global supply chain that moves food for desperate people all over the world. And that means even when the food's actually there, the ability to get it to people who need it can be gone. For instance, last summer, disruptions led to some food spoiling in a warehouse.
The Trump administration is planning to destroy a massive amount of emergency food. Some 500 metric tons, or just over 1 million pounds of high-energy biscuits meant to feed hungry kids in Afghanistan and Pakistan will now be incinerated. That first reported by The Atlantic.
We have a kind of a standard procedure that if food is expired, it will be destroyed.
Federal workers had requested approval from USAID leadership to move the emergency food before it spoiled, but their memos went unanswered.
That is just maddening. Especially not even answering the memos. Leaving someone on red is always unforgivable, but especially when the text is, hey, shorty, 1 million pounds of high-energy biscuits about to expire. You up? And scenes like that are playing out all over the world. At one refugee camp in Kenya that had relied on USAID funding, reporters found mothers who'd had to choose which of their kids to feed and pregnant women who were so desperate for calories that they ate mud. But it's not just food assistance that's been cut. It's estimated more than 2,000 health clinics have closed in crisis zones around the world. Here is what happened at just one.
Before, the NGO Action Against Hunger ran this centre here, providing life-saving medical assistance. But it closed down in February, along with 7 others in the area, when USAID stopped funding the organisation. Within just over a month, 29 children in the district died of malnutrition and illness.
We've never had such a high death rate. It was catastrophic. These are deaths that we could have avoided if funding had been maintained and we continued our activities.
Yeah, it's appalling. And it makes it even worse when you remember House Republicans literally celebrated these cuts with this shit. Yeah, it's true, you are killing a lot of people in Africa, you jib-jabbed fucks. The point is, these cuts have cost lives. And perhaps one of the clearest examples of this concerns PEPFAR, or the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It was created during the George W. Bush administration and is often described as one of the most successful global health programs in history. It's credited with saving 26 million lives and enabling 7.8 million babies to be born without HIV since it was created. It is as close to a miracle as this government has ever accomplished. If I had to say one nice thing about George W. Bush, this programme would be it. And if I had to say 2, I would go quiet. And while the administration will stress that PEPFAR still exists, its crucial aid delivery mechanism has been severely disrupted. As soon as the cuts started last January, clinics were forced to shut their doors, essential frontline health workers were furloughed, and community programmes reaching the most vulnerable people stopped. And while PEPFAR was granted a limited waiver to implement urgent life-saving HIV treatment services, a lot got left out of that waiver. Because, well, for instance, it allowed the prevention medication PrEP for pregnant and breastfeeding women. It didn't include it for anyone else, including those who were already on it. It also left out funding for HIV prevention more generally and most programming for orphans and vulnerable children. And a major casualty of cuts to PEPFAR were locally rooted programmes tailored to the needs of specific groups of people, like specialised clinics for sex workers, men who have sex with men, and people who inject drugs. And infuriatingly, to some Republicans, that seemed to be sort of the point.
This stuff about PEPFAR, oh my God, you're going to destroy the world. Now, there's a part of PEPFAR that deals with money for life-saving care, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And there's a part of PEPFAR that you look at it and you want to say, pass me the sick bucket, isn't there?
Yes, sir.
And you're getting rid of the sick bucket stuff.
Yes, sir.
You're getting rid of $5.5 million to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex advocacy in Uganda, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
I can't believe we're arguing about this. I can't believe we're arguing about this.
Wow, that is some pretty homophobic stuff coming from a man wearing the single cuntiest pair of glasses I think I've ever seen. Also, for what it's worth, if anything is going to make me say pass the sick bucket, it isn't the critical work of PEPFAR, it is the memory rattling eternally around my head of Senator John Kennedy saying this.
I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth.
Well, that certainly makes one of us. But despite what Kennedy said there, cuts to PEPFAR are absolutely affecting life-saving care, and for a huge amount of people, and not just those whose lives seem to make him want to reach for the sick bucket. Even short disruptions to HIV care can be deadly and have already resulted in stories like this.
The cutoff of the medication of the HIV ARVs has really, affected us so much.
The 8 HIV-positive orphans he cared for used to get their medicine from the local hospital for free. After the cuts, he was told he'd have to pay, and because he couldn't afford to do so, the orphanage ran out. Without this medication, 14-year-old Migande Andrew quickly fell ill.
He got weaker and weaker every day and, lost his life in the process.
The community he loved gathering to say their goodbyes, burying him on February 21st.
That photo is absolutely gutting. And since Elon seems to genuinely want pictures of what USAID does around the world to somehow prove to him that it's worthwhile, I hope a day of that fucking ghoul's life does not go by without someone sending him that photo. And you know who cannot claim he didn't know the value of USAID's work, especially when it comes to HIV? Marco Rubio. Because back in 2015, while running for president, he said this.
Foreign aid can make a difference when properly used. And if you ever have a chance, travel to the African continent. And you will meet people who are alive today because the American taxpayer funded antiviral HIV medications that kept them alive. It will not be easy to radicalize people who are alive because the American taxpayer saved their lives and the lives of their children.
That's a really good point, Marco. And that is clearly a very different Rubio back then, one who seemed to have political aspirations beyond disassociating on a couch while J.D. Vance yells at Zelensky like a kid stuck at a sleepover while his friend's parents fight. And incredibly, I'm still only scratching the surface here. There are programmes concerning treatment and prevention of cholera and neglected tropical diseases, clean water and climate resiliency, and many, many others that have also been butchered. But there is one more area I think is worth mentioning, and that is education. Because without funding for that, there are children around the world who no longer have a safe place to learn. And while these stories may not be captured when you hear about the numbers of deaths, that does not mean the impacts aren't horrific. Just look at this massive refugee camp in Bangladesh, populated by Rohingya refugees from Myanmar. The US slashed its funding by nearly half. And just one of the consequences is that many kids no longer have a school to attend and have been forced into dire circumstances. There's been a sharp rise in girls being forced into prostitution, and UNICEF has estimated that cases of child marriage rose by 21% compared to the same period the year prior. And without school to attend, young boys like this one were suddenly forced to go to work.
10-year-old Mohammed Arfan spends all day selling snacks, missing the classroom where he once felt safe.
I returned home crying, and my family asked, "Why are you crying?" "The school has been closed. I'm crying because of that. I will no longer be able to study in the school. That is why I was crying."
Arfan worries about being targeted by kidnappers or thieves while at work, but he has no other option.
Yeah, it's awful. And honestly, I would not be at all surprised if Benny Johnson travelled there to post a thrilled video where he says that kid's snack stand is the best selfie spot in all of southeastern Bangladesh. But if he does that, I'm warning you now, I'm taking down the electrical grid. Look, what this administration has done is beyond cruel. I haven't shown you anywhere close to the worst footage we had to watch putting this story together. And after seeing and reading about all of this, it is actually stomach-churning to think about coffin memes or gravestone Instagram posts or overjoyed selfie videos, because you have to be an absolute ashtray of a person to cheer this kind of thing on. Now, I should say, the Trump administration has announced a new approach called the America First Global Health Strategy. It's supposed to restart some forms of health-related foreign aid, though no other kinds and only in some countries, with the central idea being that they want local governments to take more agency over foreign aid. And honestly, I genuinely hope it works. But we have very little in the way of specifics, and it's going to be difficult to implement given this administration just detonated the decades' worth of expertise, goodwill and institutional scaffolding that had helped them deliver the aid. They've also insisted, by the way, that any foreign aid should further the national interest of the United States, though I will point out that's exactly what USAID was already doing. Because even if you are a sociopath and don't think saving millions of lives is a good thing in and of itself, you should know the agency brought us goodwill around the world while also tracking and preventing global disease outbreaks, which, as this man who worked alongside USAID in Ghana correctly points out, is sort of in our own interest.
If we are able to prevent pandemics, it's a global good. Any infection that you can pick from Ghana as an American citizen, you take it back there.
Or a little mosquito on the plane.
Mosquito on the plane. Now more than ever, it's easier to transmit disease across the globe within a day.
Yeah, he's right. And anyone familiar with the phrases sourdough starter or Animal Crossing or Carol Baskin knows how painfully true that is. And look, I know the Trump administration's constantly spitting out disasters. I really do. And I'm sure they'd like nothing more than for people to move on from this. But it is crucial not to let what they've done be forgotten. Because while the numbers of those hurt or killed by these cuts can be genuinely hard to wrap your head around, the individual people aren't. USAID was not perfect, but it was working miracles. And this government decided to retract those miracles on purpose. This is a man-made disaster. And when you remember these faces, I want you to think of these two. People like Elon, send me a pic Musk, Pete, revenge tour Morocco, Mike, 9/11 jeans Benz, Jeremy, please define fraud for me Lewin, and Marco fucking Rubio. Because in the future, I'm sure they're going to want to try and spin their work destroying USAID into something a lot more palatable, but we cannot let them do that. The very least we can do going forward is to remember what they fucking did.